I'm Charles Galdi, your host for Vision New England's Church in Action program. This week, we're talking about teaching people to live like Jesus so they can become like Jesus and to teach others to do the same thing. In other words, how to make disciples who make disciples. And we're talking with Leiko McSherry from Cape Cod Church in East Falmouth, Massachusetts, where she leads their children's ministry, but she also leads a group that is using a resource called Practicing the Way to help people make disciples. Leiko, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome, Charles. I'm glad to be here.
Can you give us a little bit about a little bit of your bio? Who are you? How'd you wind up in East Falmouth, and what you're doing there?
Sure, happy to do so, Charles. Interesting because you sent this a little prompt ahead of time to let me know that we were going to talk about a bio, and it's really interesting talking about sort of your credentials and then what brought you to where you are today. So from a CV point of view, from like just a work bio, as you said, I work at Cape Cod Church. I've been here for 8 years on staff, part-time, working specifically in the elementary age children's area, and then also helping out with the internship program that we have here as a coordinator for that. And then, as we like to say, other jobs as assigned is ministry. So that's been the past 8 years of my life. But really, my bio is for the past quarter century, I have been raising 3 children. And of all the things that have worked on, like challenged me, encouraged me to grow, revealed things about myself and about the nature of God to me, that has done it the most. And raising other human beings, because humans are hard. But work life, I worked at a preschool. I have worked at a coffee shop for the past like 33 years of my life. I've been working at the same coffee shop off and on. Yeah. So, and then sort of like little bits that I think define who I am. I'm a 51-year-old woman, Gen Xer, who was born in a different country and raised primarily in that country. Parents are multicultural, as you can see. So all of those things, I think, have been formative in the kind of person that I have become and why I'm interested in spiritual formation and discipleship in the first place.
Well, and it's part of what I picked up in that is that 25 years of children will drive you to God.
That is one. Well, if you're not already there, it certainly will. I think working with children, specifically your own children, but also other people's children, I think really does reveal parts of who you are that might remain hidden if you didn't work with children. Because they don't hold back on sort of the questions they ask or the comments that they make. And so, yeah, I think that that's, they stretch you because you just never know what to expect.
Yeah. Maybe, and could you share a little about your own spiritual journey, a little bit more about that? Because I know you've been doing a number of different things, pushing into this area, which is so needed by the church. And you're one of the leading people working through what does it look like in my own life?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm a leading person, but in my own life. Charles, I was raised in a Christian household, and that is such a blessing. But as anybody who has been raised in a Christian household knows, it also comes with like this baggage that at some point really needs to be unpacked. So I would say my formative years, like being raised by a Christian family, I had ideas from a young age of what was morally right and who Jesus and who God are, like what my image of God, my image of self, all of those things were formed very early on by my family. I'm so lucky to have parents who were both Christians. But that was also tied into their own upbringing and tied into sort of a cultural Christian experience. They were very conservative. So, I wore skirts a lot. I don't so much anymore, there were all sorts of rules and regulations. So my spiritual journey and that formation piece was at some point you come to the end of that, of all of those rules, um, and you discover that they alone don't suffice.
Mhm.
And so I had that experience. I had a sort of a come to Jesus moment, and I ultimately call it my true conversion moment. Was I saved before that? Yes, I absolutely believe that I was. Was I not particularly self-aware? I would agree with that too. But that come to Jesus moment, that conversion moment, which was born out of difficult circumstances, um, was this moment of coming to the end of that, coming to the end of what I had been brought up with, um, and saying, "There has to be more,"
Yeah.
and then
And
discovering it's Jesus.
and I want to tease something out that you said there, because I think a lot of people would conflate two things you just said. One is that I reached the end and realized that the some of the things from my upbringing, rules and regulations, were not sufficient.
Mhm,
Um, where a lot of people would say, and then I found Jesus and got saved.
mhm.
But you're saying, no, I was already saved. And so when you're saying you reached the end of that and the rules and regulations were not sufficient for what?
So they weren't sufficient to make me, um, experience a relationship.
Hmm.
Like the rules and regulations and the information, like all the
Yep.
biblical information and the assurance of salvation even, all of that, um, was all head knowledge,
Yeah.
and I appreciate it. And I think all of that is, all that information is necessary and really good, and I'm so grateful for that foundation. But, um, I think as you walk through life and you start to realize that everything that's important in life is relational, everything that's important is relational. And if you don't have that central relationship with the Godhead, with
Mhm.
the power of the Spirit, the presence of God in you, with Jesus as your example, and with God as your understanding that as your creator father, and you're not in an actual relationship with that, like you don't feel that, I think that that's the end. That's where I sort of met that sort of like, I don't have a relationship. One
Mhm.
of the books that, Pastor Ben gave me, we read it a long time ago, Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald. It starts off with this story. I've told this multiple times. It starts off with a story about a sinkhole and
Okay.
how on the surface everything looked like built up and
Mhm.
wonderful and strong, like they had foundations, and then a sinkhole appears and you realize there's really nothing under there. That was sort of my moment of like when things really got hard and the ground started to crumble, saying there's not a lot under there.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bottomless pit. There was something at the bottom that I could land on, but there wasn't a lot holding all of that up, and I needed to build from the pit back up to the surface, and it's painful but good.
Is it a fair analogy to think about it about, so let's talk about you and I and our relationship. And so
Mhm.
if I, Ben has told me a lot of things about you before we met, or I'd seen you on videos, or right, I knew of you in passing and stuff like that. And so I knew about you. And there was a relationship there,
Yeah.
but it's maybe a superficial relationship
Mhm.
that over the years evolves into, actually, we know each other a bit more, and there's still stuff we don't know about each other, but it's a different relationship today than
Mhm.
it was probably 5 or 6 years ago when we first met. Is that what you're getting at, where I'm saved because there is a relationship and a trust that I have with God, but it's not a deep one?
Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it, yes.
Okay. Okay. And
Thank
and
you.
so no. I'm just trying to make sure I'm tracking with you. And so that's your journey. And so you've been doing then a lot to step into that. And
Yes,
what
yeah,
are some of the things you've been doing now as you realize that? And I think that's a really important nuance as a faithful follower of Jesus before this, and
yeah.
you found that you didn't have some of the depth of foundation you needed, and that God offers to us. What are some of the things you've done to step into that?
Yeah. So I would say the very first thing I did sort of actively, and I say actively because passively, I had like I went through a season that was difficult. I read a book. We can get into that in a minute because that'll lead us into practicing the way. I read a book, and that was just like this aha moment. And then I started to dig. So one of the very first things that I did was I got a spiritual director. So I found a spiritual director. I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yep.
But I was talking to a friend and said, I wish there was a person who did this kind of thing and who was like that. And she said, well, I know somebody who does that. Are you kidding me? So I got a spiritual director. That was huge because she was able to start carving out a space for me. We meet once a month for an hour, and she would carve out this space. I mean, I call it holy space, but she would carve out this space and would help me sort of hear what I was saying, and then more importantly, start to hear where God was working in this space and in the quiet that she was carving out, because we
Yeah.
don't spend a lot of time carving out quiet time. So then I started carving out quiet time on my own.
Yeah.
And then all throughout this piece, this starting point of this, post conversion, if you will, I was really digging into a lot of reading. So that was a part of that. And then when you find somebody you really like, you say like, well, who do they read? And what did they do? And what podcasts do they listen to? So I just started, it was like a spider web, you just start to like go out to hear. So I became aware of a couple of different institutes that specifically train on spiritual formation. Renovare out in the West, and then here locally, Sila.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Leadership Transformation.
Transformations. Yeah. Steve Macchia, ministry founded by Steve Macchia, who a lot of people in New England will know.
Exactly. So yes, leadership, LTI is well known in this area. So discovered that, attended the Abide program while I was trying to figure out if I wanted to attend the 2-year program with Renovare, which is a spiritual formation program. Ended up sticking with LTI and am currently just finishing year 1 of a 2-year program on spiritual direction called Sila.
Nice. And so now, how would you characterize that relationship today that you have with Jesus versus where you were? Are there words you could put to it, or is it hard?
So I have to use marriage, which feels very biblical. So I'll use that. I would say beforehand, it was definitely, like 3 years ago, leading up to 3 years ago, it was, as you said, knowing sort of somewhat at a distance and knowing a lot, feeling like I knew a lot, but not feeling like necessarily he knew me. I knew he knew me, but I didn't feel like it was an intimate relationship. And then over the last 3 years, it's just been this growing, kind of like hanging out once in a while and then hanging out more often. And then it just feels very deeply personal, intimate, and constant, continual.
Which is what the Bible really talks about when it talks about knowing God. A lot of it's gotten translated for a whole host of reasons into knowing about God, but not knowing God the way the Bible talks about. Abraham knew Sarah's deep, intimate marriage is a really good analogy.
Yeah.
And so, so that's interesting. So that's great. So that's some of your journey, and we might come back to pieces of that as we go through the rest of the conversation because it's intertwined, I know.
Yeah.
And so, but you read a book. I'm picking up on that. I think I know the book you're going to talk about. So what book did you read?
Yeah. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which, and this was coming out of COVID. So there was a piece of that was like, we've done no hurry in the past, whatever year, which wasn't actually true because anybody who was doing kids ministry during COVID, it was like nothing. It was like reinventing the wheel. It was so hard. So there was actually a ton of work and a ton of just like learning new stuff. How do we do this? So that piece was exhausted. Anyway, reading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and then ultimately being driven from there to start to read through the Gospels very slowly and meditatively in a style that many would know, Lectio Divina style, just very slow, very meditatively. And for the first 9 months after reading Ruthless, I was in Matthew, and it was just transformative. Like I'd never read it before.
Yeah. Okay.
So it started with The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And from there, because I really enjoyed John Mark Comer's style of communication, it was, I'm going to read another book. and I'm gonna listen to all the podcasts. So I listened to all the podcasts, like everything I could
Wow.
find. And then, as I said, reading, like, well, who does he read? Who's influencing him? And then really starting to discover Richard Foster, Dallas Willard, John Ortberg. And then I'm thinking, like, well, I need some women. I need some women to influence in here. And so starting to read, Ruth Haley Barton and Sarah Bessey and just Evelyn Underhill and some more difficult ones I needed translations for, and just digging in there. So, yeah, that was the
Yeah.
snowball effect.
It's interesting because you're in my journey, as you know, there's some parallels here in terms of timing and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so I wasn't finding Comer, I was finding Willard
Yeah.
and doing the same thing. Like, okay, what else did Willard write? And then what I love about what Comer is doing is he's taking Willard, who would say himself when he was alive, he's not the most accessible guy in the world in his writing. I would argue his lectures are different, and you can watch those,
Yeah.
but he's not that accessible. But Comer makes him amazingly accessible, and cross generational and multi ethnic, and really really helpful stuff Comer is doing. And so you read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Do you read then his next book, Practicing the Way, as well?
I did
Okay.
actually, but later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
And
read that later. Yeah.
and I just want to affirm what you're saying about slowing down in the reading of scripture.
Mm.
I've been a Bible reader since we got saved, 40 years ago, but it was always on a plan.
Yeah.
And we've got to get through the Bible, and whether that was a 1-year Bible or just 4 chapters a day or something like that, and that forces you into what Foster talks about in the opening line
Mhm.
of Celebration of Disciplines. I forget the exact quote. If you know it, correct me, but it's something about the plague of civilization is superficiality.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if we're reading through and we're not stopping and really thinking about what is God saying here, what's going on here, what's happening, what does it tell me about God? If we're not asking all those kinds of questions and really thinking and meditating on it, we're stuck in a superficial mode,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So you read Matthew, and that's an eye opener for you because you're going through in this much slower, more thoughtful pace. And then what happens? What do you find next? Is practicing the way the next thing you come across?
Um, how did that happen? So when I was reading Ruthless Elimination and I started to listen to podcasts and digging into who is this author, because I wanted to know a little bit about John Mark Comer, just to know, were we lockstep? What's his church like? What's his
Mhm.
theology? And out of that, I think it was at the beginning of the podcast, how you do a little bumper at the beginning, and it was they were announcing that they were starting this nonprofit organization called Practicing the Way, and they were going to release, or I believe the wording is drop the first episode
Yeah.
on Sabbath at a particular day at a particular time. And I got super nerdy. I put a reminder in my calendar, and I'm driving along the road one day and a little ding went off. I got so excited. I pulled over and, listened to the first session on Sabbath. And it was so good.
Yeah.
It was so good. And I thought, I have to do this with somebody. So I went home and said to my husband, who Mark,
Yeah.
I'm like, would you sit and do this with me? We had never done anything like this before. I said,
Mhm.
you recommend we do it around a table. Can I make dinner and we sit and we watch this together? And we're not generally in the habit of sitting at the table and watching something to
Yeah.
watch something. It's talk time. But so we got through the first session of the Sabbath practice, and there's 4 video sessions. We watched the first session, and just immediately we were like, who can we do this with?
Yeah. Okay.
Who would love this?
Mhm.
And where we could really dig in and have dynamic conversation, because the video sessions have usually 2 pauses built into the video,
Mhm.
where they encourage you to pause your video and respond to 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah.
And so we handpicked a group of people that we thought would really enjoy doing that, and we started meeting on Fridays. We called it our Sabbath group. We ended up calling it our Shabbat group, and we meet on Fridays. We light some candles. We have dinner together around a table, and then we would do the study.
And so let me jump you ahead, because at some point then John Mark Comer comes out with the book Practicing the Way of Jesus. And part of that is he's got a book that's followed up by
Yeah.
an 8-week program that
Yeah.
really is taking all of the spiritual formation principles that Willard was talking about, that Wesley would have been talking about, that Ignatius is talking about, that Jesus is talking about,
Yeah.
and bundles them up in an 8-week program where there's video teaching and then discussion, to your point, along with
Yeah.
a bunch of 4-week sessions on each one of the disciplines. So a 4-week program on Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so that's, and I think there's maybe 2 more still to come out. There's one on scripture that we've been doing at our church up here in New Hampshire. And so at some point you move from, hey, we're a Sabbath group or
Yeah.
Shabbat
Yeah.
to let's do Practicing the Way
Yeah.
8 weeks.
So yeah, I'll fast forward. There were a lot of things that sort of, I think God just he tends to be way slower than I want him to be, but I'm actually enjoying the speed now, but slowly maneuvered and opened up, opportunities and prodded at my heart in different ways. So slowly over the course of probably like 2 years, I got to this point where it was the right moment to say, hey, should we do this with other people? Should we invite other people to do this as well? And over the course of those 2 years, there were little groups that I would get together with and do various pieces of not the Practicing the Way, but just pieces of spiritual formation. But when we decided to do it as a sort of a more formalized small group, if you will, which is sort of how our church does, growth groups, growth groups, life groups, small groups. We call them small groups. Formalized and do it through the church. We said, well, we need a curriculum. What are we going to do? And Practicing the Way was the obvious choice to me. So we started with exactly that 8-week program that you mentioned, Practicing the Way primer.
Okay.
And we did our 8-week series, and I had no plan beyond that, except for to ask the group, what do you want to do now? And they didn't want to end. So I said, okay, we can do another 4-week program. We actually we take every 4-week group and flesh it out to be 8 weeks.
Okay.
Because 4 weeks is fast for any of these.
Okay. Interesting.
Especially the scripture practice. That one felt like a lot to cover certainly in 4 weeks, even in 8 weeks, it felt like a lot to cover.
Interesting. So the 8-week program you do, and that's basically an hour and a half once a week where this group gets together. There's some teaching, discussion, some debrief of the prior week and prep for the assignment for the current week, the challenge of what you're going to do. And so you do that for 8 weeks. And what do you see happen in
that? So there's tangibles and intangibles. And I think the intangibles are probably more important in some way. We did do a survey at the end of the last session, and so we have some confirmation on this. The thing that I saw is that community is super important. You know it, but when you see it in action, you're like, wow, okay, don't forget how important this is. People loved.
From a spiritual formation perspective.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
It's, I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, it's life together. It's meant to be done together. So the community aspect is really important. I think that what Practicing the Way did was gave language to living out an aware life of spiritual formation. So, just sort of giving language and defining and providing guardrails for how to do certain things. I mean, a lot of people want, just tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
And then the beautiful thing is all of these give actual practices, go through the week and do this, and then come back and reflect. The reflection piece, incredibly important. So in terms of just practical stuff, people reading their Bible more, really the Bible's starting to come alive to them in a way that it hadn't before, becoming very personal for them. People experiencing Sabbath for the first time and wrestling through the discomfort of not producing or consuming once a week, starting off wow, I tried 24 hours. I couldn't possibly do it. I tried 12 hours. That was really hard. 3 hours was as much as I could do. we had some couples do the group together, and just hearing like how for them it was impacting their relationship was really interesting.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Because they would say, well, what are, we're not normally you would go watch TV, I would do this, but they were like, oh, we've agreed to be digital free today. What do we do? Let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
Like that kind of
Well,
thing.
or we had a couple, because we've done it too, and there's a number of churches doing it around New England, and all the feedback is phenomenal, which is why I wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
And we had a couple who said, we're not turning on the TV as much. So
Yeah.
it's not even part of a, hey, this is a plan, and now we're forcing a discipline. It's just like, it
Yeah.
just kind of naturally, we're talking more,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Which is fascinating. It's almost like spiritual formation does stuff.
It's crazy. I think the thing that is the sort of the crazy piece, like you're saying, is when you start to actually put into practice a practice, you start to do it, which I just call all of them ultimately are aimed at abiding.
Yeah. Yep.
And you start abiding rather than focusing on the fruit, right? You just start abiding. The fruit starts to appear and you're surprised by it. And yet it's right there in John 15 that's how it works. I
Yeah.
don't know why I'm surprised.
Willard used to say, we need to stop trying to become people who keep the commandments
Mhm.
and start trying to become people for whom it is natural to keep the commandments.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that's what we've been missing for so long in some of our traditions and experiences. Yeah, the thing that for me, the way I think about it for myself, but I think I'm hearing a little bit in you and what I've heard from other churches is, it's not that nobody's ever told me that I'm supposed to become like Jesus. It's not nobody told me to do spiritual disciplines, although in fairness, for most of us, a very narrow set and no help doing them in
Yes.
reality other than maybe modeling.
Yes.
And so, but Willard, for me, Comer, and I think others out there, Foster, Ortberg, to your point, they suddenly snap all the pieces together. So I have them floating around in my head from a sermon, a lesson, something I read, the Bible, and suddenly they snap together. I'm like, oh, I get it. Right. And that's what I hear from so many people is suddenly this makes sense to me, that
Mhm.
I am called to be like Jesus, and God uses those spiritual practices to transform me to be like Jesus. And suddenly my thoughts, you're talking about the head knowledge, right? Which is the concept for me is it's like it's an intellectual thing. Not that intellect and mind don't matter, but the heart thing in the Bible is it's about thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And so suddenly now it moves from just an intellectual thing to my thoughts and feelings are changing, not because I've decided to change them, because I'm terrible at that, and we
Mhm.
all are,
Yeah.
but because in abiding, suddenly they're changing, you know, on their own, quote unquote,
Yeah.
really if God's changing it.
Yeah, yeah. It's creating space. The language that we use in spiritual formation is just creating this space for the Spirit to do the work that we've been sort of crowding Him out and trying to do it ourselves. And so when you create the space for that, yeah, the thing that's been missing, and the thing that this program in particular, and then other programs as well. I mean, as I said when we were up at the Vision New England at the gathering that happened this
Yeah.
week, I start off with, if you think this program is what is going to change, the life of your church, or the depth of spiritual formation that's happening in your church, it won't be. It's just the newest, shiniest sort of vehicle in the lot right now. And there'll be another one in, however many years. It's really how you implement it. But I think what this does more than any that I've been engaged in the past is it really focuses on the practices, and then holds you accountable by, when you return the next week, the reflection piece. Like, how
Well,
did you do on this?
yeah, and I think about some of the pastors that I know who are really serious about spiritual formation, or maybe a better way to say it, because I think so many are, maybe on the leading edge of figuring out what this looks like in a church context, is might be a better way to say it, is they always end with a challenge.
Yeah.
And some of them will say, you won't get out of a room with me without a challenge around your spiritual formation, not about your behavior,
Yeah.
but about your spiritual formation of what's the next. And that's what Comer does each week. There's an assignment. Are you willing to step into this?
And
Um,
I would say, Charles, that I think that a lot of sermons, like a Sunday sermon, ends that way, with a challenge. Like a good sermon ends with,
yeah,
go forth and try this out, like taste and
yeah,
see, or try. But that return
Yeah.
And then not the just move on to the next thing, but the actual reflection piece that is appropriate for a small group environment, maybe not a
Yeah.
Sunday morning environment, not a sermon environment, but a small group environment, that return again on a regular basis and reflecting on the practice, not just saying, you did it, right? Check. Okay,
Yeah.
let's move on. That reflection piece is so important.
I agree. Although there's nothing in the law that says a church service after the sermon can't have 2 minutes of silence to process what we just heard, right? As opposed to, okay, the next song, benediction, go get the kid at the nursery, go to lunch, and by the time we get
Wait,
time to
hold
reflect,
Charles. They definitely have to come get their kids.
right? Yeah, right. But we
Yeah.
could give them a couple of minutes just to kind of process that.
Yes. Yeah.
As again, part of this slowing things down more.
Yeah.
And so that's great. And the amazing thing is we're seeing so much amazing coming out of Practicing the Way, and it's free.
It is a free resource, which is just crazy. That and the Bible Project. I
Yeah.
mean, they offer all of these unbelievable resources,
Yeah. Yeah.
seminary level resources for free.
Yeah.
So
And so,
there's, yeah.
yeah. And so you can get that at practicingtheway.org, and McKenna will put that into the chat if you see this on Facebook. Leiko, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for not just making time to be with us today and sharing what you've learned in it, but thank you for modeling a spiritual journey for us. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your ministry at Cape Cod Church. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for everything that you do. I'm really grateful for you.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you too, Charles. This has
Thanks.
been very good. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
This program is created by Vision New England, which helps the church work in unity to make disciples, do justice, and share Jesus, to accelerate evangelism so that New England will be transformed. You can find additional resources and partner in our mission at visionnew.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio. Thanks so much, and God bless you.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.